What's going on, YouTube? This is Boxingwave. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Before we move on and talk everything else boxing outside of just this division in 154, I do want to make one last video before we move on, just addressing 154, jermellcharlo, Tszyu, and all of the other top tier fighters at 154. This has been the talk of boxing for the last few days. I know I've definitely been on social media talking about it. And I want to talk a little bit about, obviously, the fight between jermellcharlo and Tszyu. But I want to speak on Brian Castano and a little bit about Sebastian Fundora as well. Right? Because these other guys, are fighters that are considered to be the best in the division. You know what I'm saying? So we can't just ignore them moving forward. But yeah, Charlo and Tszyu are definitely due to fight each other. All right, that fight was supposed to happen. Charlo pulled out of the fight because of an injury, and we're supposed to get that fight back. But let me start off by saying boxing is a worldwide sport. If you haven't figured that out, you're going to have to learn very, very quickly. Okay? Shout out to my man D-Style. He touched on this a little bit a couple days ago. I was listening to a video he did where he was talking about the arrogance of American boxing fans. And I'm going to speak a little bit on that, but I want to also challenge on a little bit on what he said. I didn't listen to the whole video, so maybe he brought up this point too. But he was right. The American boxing fan and boxers, or athletes in general, we just feel that we beat everybody in everything because we think we have the best talent over here. And, outside of like soccer or, football, where everybody else, we call it soccer, but everybody else call it football. Most sports, we just feel that we are the best. Most, not all, but most. And when it comes to boxing, a lot of us do need to understand that there are people just as talented, if not more talented, than we are. So when I look at a fight, I look at the fighter themselves, not where they're from, but what I see them doing in the ring. So when it comes to doing these predictions, I'm not looking at how I feel about them being from a specific place or looking a certain way. And I said this the other day. So there are a lot of arrogant American fighters and fans. Tony Harrison is a very arrogant fighter, right? He thought that Tszyu, he didn't look that impressive in other fights, so he didn't beat nobody. So he felt that he was just going to go over there and outbox him. And a lot of the fans from here felt the same way. I don't think that all involves Tszyu being from Australia. I think some of that involves him being the son of a legend. And I think that comes along with, being an athlete. I watch basketball and, Bronny James, the son of LeBron James, is playing in high school. He's getting ready to go to college and possibly go to the NBA soon, right? And there's a lot of pressure in being the son of one of the greatest of all time. Some may feel that he's the greatest of all time. I don't, but I think he's one of the greatest. And there's a lot of pressure that comes along with that. And, people are going to feel that, you're getting certain gifts because you're the son. You're getting moved a certain way. So when it comes to Tszyu, I can understand like people are just, giving him credit and giving him props based on the fact that he's the son of a legend. But you got to look at what he's doing in the ring. I think that's most important. You got to watch his fights. At the bare minimum, you got to watch maybe some extended highlights against other fighters that fight similar to a Tony Harrison or a jermellcharlo, or Brian Castano or any other fighter that he may face in the future at 154. Stop going to BoxRec and just looking at the resume and thinking you're an expert on these fighters, because that's what's happening with a lot of people. You know, and I mean, not just content creators, but just fans in general. But it goes both ways. There are a lot of very arrogant fight fans that believe that their fighters, like a Tszyu, can just beat everybody now off this one performance. It was a great performance. It was the best performance in his career against the best fighter that he's faced. You passed the test. You proved to all of us that you belong here and that you can at least fight on the same level as some of the top fighters in its division. You did that. I gave you props before the fight and after the fight. But the arrogance in some of the comments that I've been reading, you know, when jermellcharlo pulled out of the fight, people were saying that he was ducking Tszyu. He's never ducked anyone in his career, but he's ducking Tszyu. The Tszyu that had just previously got dropped by Arrogance. You know, who's the other fighter? Was it Wade? Let me look it up. That Tszyu also, Wade Ryan. Tszyu was dropped by him too in the first round. Now, Tszyu is undefeated, so it's not a big deal. You know, people get caught with a good shot, you get dropped. It's part of the learning process. I mean, Tony Harrison, who's the best fighter that he's fought in his whole career, Tony didn't drop Tszyu. In fact, Tony didn't really give that much of a challenge to Tszyu. You know, it was a good fight. It was competitive, but Tszyu won the fight very clearly. You know what I'm saying? But the arrogance of some of Tszyu's fans is getting a little out of control. And we have to call that out too. And it's not just Tszyu. There's fans and fighters that are around the world, not Tszyu because he's not arrogant, but the fans. I think to say that jermellcharlo faked his injury to avoid this fight, there's arrogance that come from making a statement like that. For a guy that's never ducked anyone his whole career. For a guy that's currently undisputed and did not win undisputed by winning one fight. No, this guy bounced around and collected all of the belts from the other champions. He has plenty of scars and drama and defeats he had to take to get to this point to become undisputed. Not only that, but people are saying that Charlo was definitely going to duck him now because of Tim's performance against someone that Charlo knocked out the last time they fought. So yes, Americans are arrogant. You know, I mean, I'm a New Yorker. I mean, we're probably the most arrogant people on the planet, in my opinion. That's probably me being arrogant by even making that comment. Because New Yorkers are assholes. Well, I'm the only exception. I'm just joking around. That's me being arrogant. You know what I'm saying? But just not playing around. Just on all seriousness. Tszyu did a great job the other day. And I'm not taking anything away from him. And I cannot wait for him and jermellcharlo to fight. I see, like, going into this fight, I see the only thing that I feel like may be a problem going into this fight, as far as, like, the politics and negotiating, is where the fight is going to take place. You know? I want them to settle with whatever they agree were. You know, I'm sure Tim wants to fight in Australia. And you could make a strong case that they'll probably make more money having a fight in Australia. I don't know if that's true. I said if you can make a strong case that the fight might be bigger out there. All right? I see Tszyu fight Arrogance in the States. I see the crowd in that fight. Where did they fight? They fought in the Armory in Minneapolis. All right? I saw the crowd out there. It wasn't nothing like the crowd out in Australia. They fought in a stadium. All right. And it was packed. All right. So with that being said, I'm not saying that Jermell can't do numbers. I went to the Barclays and it looked like it was a pretty crowded night when he came out here and fought in the Barclays. You know what I'm saying? But I didn't see that. So I can see that issue being an issue. I think if it does happen in the States, it's probably going to happen on the West Coast, in Cali, or maybe in Vegas, you know, because that would be a better trip for TimTszyu to make it to. You know, I'm sure his fans will fly out, you know. Shit, I would probably like to be at that fight wherever they decide to have it. But we'll talk more about that later. But that's the only issue that I see here with this fight getting made is that one thing. But hopefully it happens because I want to see it, and I think Tim is worthy, is a worthy opponent. Now let's talk about the fighters and the actual fight. I don't know if you guys were here when the Brian Castano fight was coming up with jermellcharlo, but I made a few comments that I think some people didn't agree with. I said to you guys that Brian Castano was the most dangerous opponent for jermellcharlo in his entire career. Before he was a champion, before he was with Derek James, before all of that. I told you that Brian Castano and his style was the most dangerous for jermellcharlo. Up to that point. The video is still up. And we saw that fight. And most of you don't even think Jermell won that fight. But he went into the rematch and he gave us his career best performance, in my opinion, in stopping Brian Castano, who's been a phenomenal pro and amateur. He, in my opinion, is one of the most technically sound, pressure, high volume fighters out there. In my opinion. Still, even with the loss of jermellcharlo, I believe that. You know, I thought that Charlo was number one, and Castano, when he became champion, I thought that he was number two. I know he has a draw against what's the name, Erislandy Lara. I know he has a draw against jermellcharlo. But I thought he won the Charlo fight. All right? I thought that Charlo continuously hurting him is what made the fight closer than what it needed to be. But we're scoring rounds. We're not scoring how many times you hurt. I think that Castano won more rounds. Okay? Now, in a rematch, it was different because jermellcharlo came with a different, he brought a little bit of his old style mixed with his new style. I like the lateral movement. I like the fact that he was able to keep his back off the ropes. All right. He made a better use of his jab. All right. And he didn't stand right in front of Castano as long as he did in the first fight. Okay. I just thought overall his game plan was better. But just the improvement at controlling distance between Castano, who's the shorter fighter, and I think he's I think he has the low, he doesn't have the longer range of Charlo. So Charlo was able to move, box, jab, and control the distance better in the rematch. And that was his career best performance. And I think some of you need to understand that even though it's clear that TimTszyu is a lot better than a lot of us believe. I mean, I picked Tszyu to win by knockout. I did not think he was going to do that well. I thought that Tony was going to start out faster and win the earlier rounds, and he was going to fade, and then TimTszyu was going to stop him late. What we got was Tim not only outworking Tony Harrison in stopping Tony Harrison, but he was outboxing Tony Harrison. So now I look at TimTszyu in a different light. He's more technically sound than I thought he was leading up to the fight. But going into this this fight here, this undisputed fight here, I think both of these fighters are coming off of their two best wins in their careers. You know, Brian Castano was the better win because Brian Castano was better than Tony Harrison a few fights ago. I already told you that. I know Tony has a recorded win over Charlo, but Tony Harrison wasn't better than Brian Castano. He wasn't. And Tony Harrison has always lost by knockout. So yes, was I surprised that Tszyu beat him the way he did? Absolutely. I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but he beat him. And Tony lost the same way he always loses. It's just that Tim did better than the other guys, but he lost the same way all the time. You guys got to remember, and I'm talking about the Tszyu supporters that just thinks he's unbeatable at this point. You got to remember, not only is he fighting, if he fights jermellcharlo, not only is he fighting one of the most dangerous punchers in the sport, but he's also one of the most durable fighters out there as well. See, when Tszyu beat Inoue and he beat Gaucher, those guys had already lost, but they'd never been stopped before. And that's part of the reason why that fight went the distance. Because they were tougher than Tony. Tony might have been more skilled, but he wasn't as tough as those guys. He wasn't as durable as those guys. Once he burns out, he goes down. He gets caught with a good shot, he goes down. That's not jermellcharlo. jermellcharlo has already fought other punchers. He's fought other punchers. You know, I mean, he's knocked out Erickson Lubin in one round. You know, he beat Vanes Martirosyan, puncher. Erickson Lubin, puncher. Brian Castano, respectable puncher, not a big puncher. Jason Rosario, dangerous puncher. He's beating other punchers. Now, whether or not Tszyu is better than those guys, it's debatable. I think when it comes to Castano and Tszyu now, and that's what I really wanted to talk about today. I brought up on Twitter, I asked Twitter this, and people are still commenting off this tweet. I asked basically, who's the better pressure fighter, Castano or Tszyu? They're obviously two different fighters. All right, when I say pressure fighters, it doesn't necessarily mean they fight the same. It's just that they both are pressure fighters. They just do it differently. Castano is more volume based. Okay, he's more volume based. He throws a lot of punches. All right, a lot of combinations, a lot of flurries. He counters, but Tszyu is more of a counter puncher. You know, he's more on not wasting so many punches. He'll throw combinations, but to be honest, Tim didn't throw that many punches at once until he was ready to get Tony out of here. And that was what I was waiting for in the fight. You know, even though I wanted Tony and I was rooting Tony to win, you know, at that point in that ninth round and a few rounds before that, I had already realized that Tony wasn't going to win this fight. Plus I wanted my money too, but I realized that Tony wasn't going to win the fight. But I realized too that Tim is not going to get this stoppage unless he throws a lot of punches. And that's what he did. You know, he got him with one shot, but he got him with a second and third. And then he started just teeing off on Tony Harrison. That was the way he was going to stop him. You know? Now, Tim has a lot of power. All right? But I don't believe he has more power than jermellcharlo. I think Jermell is a more devastating puncher. I think he's more of a KO artist. Like he can literally hit you with one shot. Like Tim can hit you with one shot and change the fight around. Jermell can hit you with one shot and just knock you out with one shot. All it takes is one shot. So going to this fight, there are different pieces to this fight where I do think that Tim and his counter punching will be a problem. Plus his power, plus his speed, plus his reflexes. Just overall, his counter punching will be a problem for Jermell, because if you could find a way to neutralize Jermellcharlo, take his confidence away, maybe even strip him from his jab and back him up like the way Tony was doing in a rematch before, he was having success. I know he lost the fight, but Tony was having great success against Charlo. I think if Tim were able to do the same but do it better, which he should because he's normally fighting that exact way, he could possibly beat Jermellcharlo. He could. It's very possible. I'm not sleeping on him at all. But Jermell is a different fighter than Tony Harrison. Listen, I know Tony got a recorded win against Jermellcharlo, but Tony Harrison is not Jermellcharlo. Let me just make that clear. I probably made it clear already. He's not Jermellcharlo. And Jermellcharlo has improved since that fight. He lost to Tony. He ran it back, picked up the win. Fought Castano, struggled against him, but came back way better in the rematch. I don't even know if Jermell is at his peak yet, because his very last fight, he's 32 years old, and I believe Tony's around the same age, but I'm still seeing improvements with Jermell, whereas Tony, it looked like he's been reached his ceiling. He's reached it. There's nothing that I seen in that Tszyu fight the other day that made me feel that he was improving. And I know people were gassing the Tony Harrison win over Sergio Garcia. It was a good win because, Tony had not looked good. But Sergio Garcia is not a pressure fighter. Sergio Garcia was forced to walk Tony down, and Tony was comfortably just fighting on his back foot. Sergio Garcia don't got no power, and he's not a pressure fighter, clearly. He did well against Sebastian Fundora because Sebastian Fundora is just too easy to hit. Another pressure fighter. All three of those guys, Castano, Fundora, Tszyu, all three pressure fighters, but fight completely different. All three are pressure fighters. You got Tony all the way on the left. Counter puncher. Doesn't throw as far many punches as the other two. Okay? But he's looking for the counter all the time. All right? Doesn't throw many combinations. But he's well-rounded. Good angles. Goes to the body. Durable, tough. But you have him all the way over here. Very calculated. Extremely calculated. But he's still a pressure fighter. He's walking you down, but he's not throwing many punches. Some similarities to Canelo. You got Castano that's kind of in the middle here, right? Because he's more calculated than Fundora, but he's not as calculated as Tszyu, right? He's not as calculated as Tszyu, but he's more volume-based, He likes to throw a lot of combinations. He throws a lot of punches, but he throws with caution. You know what I'm saying? He throws with caution. I think he has to make up for his lack of height and reach, and he has to force his way to get in. So just like Tszyu in some ways, he kind of wants to have you against the ropes. That's part of the reason why Charlo struggled so much in their first fight. And then you got Fundora. He's just completely awkward because he's 6'5", and he's fighting as a... So that there is just a completely different... none of these guys are Houston guys that's fighting guys that's as tall as the top-tier heavyweights. Sebastian Fundora is tall, and his greatest strength is fighting on the inside. He has all that height and reach, but he's not even that good at controlling distance. Now I think he's slowly improving. You know, I did see his fight with what was the last person that Fundora fought? Carlos Ocampo. I see that he's trying to, you know, maintain distance and fight on the outside. And I see the improvements there, but he didn't really stick to it. He likes to brawl it out. You know, so no matter, it's just like Brandon Figueroa. No matter how much these guys try to fight, like, you know, a highly technical fight and try to control the distance and use a jab and use a reach and box, they're gonna want to scrap it out. They're gonna go. They want it to be a phone booth fight. And Fedora, his defense is lacking far less. Like he's inferior when it comes to defense, but he's big, he's powerful, and he's high, extremely high volume. You know, and he has a great inside game. You know, so yes, he gives away his reach advantage, but just like we saw in the Erickson Lubin fight, he knows how to put in work on the inside. You know, I thought the inside is where Lubin needed to be, but it was the exact opposite. Lubin needed to be on the outside and outbox him from there, like Sergio Garcia was doing a little bit. You know, work on the counters from the outside as he's coming in. All three good fighters. You know, and even if, you know, regardless of the outcome of jermellcharlo or and Tszyu, I would still like to see Tszyu fight Brian Castano. I would still like to see Tszyu and Sebastian Fundora fight, or Brian Castano and Sebastian Fundora. You could mix it up any way you like it. You know, I would like to see Jermell against Sebastian Fundora. You know, I would love to see all of these fights. You can mix it up any way you like. You know, but when I look at those fighters, you know, and my question was, you know, who was a better pressure fighter? And I gave you my answer. I'm not sure which one is better. They just have different styles. It depends on who they're fighting and how they are when they face each other. Like if Tszyu were to fight Brian Castano, for example, it really depends on, you know, I don't really know if Tim could fight on his back foot yet. I don't know, you know. I don't know how he deals with the high volume of Brian Castano. You know, Brian might be the first guy that really forces him to go backwards. You know, and how would Tim be able to deal with all of that volume from Castano? But on the other hand, Tszyu is a great counterpuncher, and he has very quick reflexes. What happens when Castano is forced to slow down his volume because he's worried about what is coming back at him? He's worried about the counters. So now he can't get off that volume that we're normally used to seeing him get, you know, throw. And now he's getting hit a lot more like he did in the Charlo rematch. You know, in order for that fight and that rematch to be competitive, Castano had to get hit a lot more than he liked to get hit. And it costed him the fight. You know, because Charlo was fighting a lot smarter in that rematch. You know, I mean, even though he got caught with big shots in the first fight, Charlo fought smarter in the second fight. You know? And then when it comes to, you know, Fundora, he gets hit all the time. But if you can't hurt him or possibly get him out of there, you know, Lubin did drop him. But if you can't get him out of there and you get tired and burned out and the punishment becomes too overwhelming for you, he could be in trouble for Tszyu or Castano or whoever he ends up fighting, you know, in the future. Or jermellcharlo. You know what I'm saying? So these are all great fights. I think Tszyu does bring a challenge to Jermell. But you guys got to remember, again, Jermell is not Tony Harrison. And no, Tszyu is not Brian Castano. The difference is I don't know who's better between those two. Tszyu is coming off his best performance But I also think that I believe, and I know they didn't fight, but I think Castano is better than Tony Harrison. And I think Castano would stop Tony Harrison as well. And I would have told you that a few fights ago. I could be wrong because they didn't fight. But I just think Castano's style is all wrong for Tony Harrison as well. You know? So the fights need to happen. But before we get there, just understand that styles make fights. And jermellcharlo is a huge puncher. He's a huge puncher. And he's extremely durable. And he has great stamina. It's a completely different fight. So don't let that fight go to your head. Because Charlo is undisputed. No one is sleeping. I know exactly what Tim is capable of. But Charlo is undisputed. And he worked his way to get there. So if Tim pulls it off, great. He could, possibly. I'm leaning towards Charlo. I'm leaning towards Charlo based on what I've seen from both. Tim has definitely impressed me. And he has definitely improved to me that he's way better than what I thought he was. And I think he should be at the top tier of this division based on that win. Not just the win, but the performance and what he did and how he won. But Charlo's a different animal. And he's in a lot of people's pound for pounds list for a reason. You know? Great matchup. You know, I actually think Charlo beats Fundora as well. I think Charlo beats Fundora, but I now believe that timtszyu would stylistically might be a more difficult fight for Charlo. I will say that. That wasn't my opinion before. I thought Fundora probably would be the most difficult fight outside of Castano, but I now believe timtszyu might be the most difficult fight because of the counters. You know, I've seen Charlo struggle against Harrison, who countered the shit out of him, you know, in their two fights. You know, especially in the second fight, even though it's like, I feel like even though Tony got dropped early in the second fight and he stopped later at the end of that fight, I still feel like Tony did better in a rematch. Let me know if you agree with that. It's just a random thing that I always felt. I like Tony's performance in the second fight because of the way he came forward. And Charlo didn't look that good dealing with that kind of pressure. You know, but once Tony started to get hit, it touched up more. Once he started to slow down, that's when the fight changed pace. All right. All right. So I think I said everything I wanted to say. I hope the fight happens. I hope there's no issues as far as location and money and you know, all the politics and all that stuff. You know, I really want to see the fight. You know, I don't really particularly care where it happens. You know, some people will sit around and make the argument all day about where the fight should happen. I think the fight should happen where the fighters agree on it happening, you know. Charlo may want to have it here. You know, I mean, he's the undisputed champion, and he should, you know, I mean, if he wants it here, he wants it here. But fighters are traveling all the time. You know, Spence traveled to the UK to fight Brook and beat him for his belt in his first title. You know, Stephen Fulton's headed over to Japan to fight Inoue. Tony Harrison just flew out to Australia to fight. You know, and I don't know the circumstances were different because Tony wasn't a champion at the time. And it was kind of voluntary for timtszyu, who was already the mandatory to fight Charlo. So I know the circumstances are not the same. But I'm just hoping as a fan that they agree on terms to make the fight happen. Because I really want to see it now. I didn't want to see it as much before because there was nothing that I saw from timtszyu that made me feel he was a threat to Charlo. But now after watching a Harrison fight, I'm like, okay, let's get this fight going. I want to see it now because timtszyu is legit, you know. Anyway, I think I've said everything I needed to say. Please, if you like the video, smash the like button, hit the like button, hit the thumbs up for me, and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'm out. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.